Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organisation create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your host, Mark Bidwell.
Hello, this is Mark Bidwell. Welcome back to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. This week's show is going to be different. Rather than having a guest and having a discussion with him about change and leadership and innovation, as I've done for many of the previous episodes, I wanted this time to share with you some materials that I developed and gave as part of a webinar the other day in service of summarizing much of the thinkings, much of the lessons, many of the lessons that I've gathered over the months of running the show, and also to promote an upcoming event called the Innovation Leadership Circle, which won't be for everyone, and I'll leave the details of it to the end. But let me just take you through, for the next probably 25 minutes, a set of materials which I pulled together, and the title of which I call Creating the Space for Innovation. And in many respects, that's what we're doing with the show. We are inviting you to come out of your day-to-day life of always-on communications, people making enormous demands of your time, and to actually just reflect a little bit from different individuals with diverse perspectives on the subject of change, leadership, and innovation, with the hope that it gives you some inspiration, some insight, some tools to actually progress your personal or organizational innovation agenda. So I really am grateful for your support, for listening, for giving me some attention over the next few minutes as I take you through these materials. And, you know, one of the things that I am hoping is that you're going to hear perhaps an example or a case study. You're going to hear something that really does resonate with you and your situation. Or, you know, perhaps you're going to see a way forward to help you better go after your vision. Or it's possible that you might feel something that touches on your situation really profoundly that you can grab hold of and take back into the workplace. So it's also called Creating Space because, you know, the need to do this is a lesson that I relearn again and again and again. And my early innovation mistakes were down to not creating this space, to not stepping back and reflecting, and not spending enough time on the questions that really do need to be addressed. You know, in other words, not creating the environment or the conditions in my team of direct reports or my organization for innovation to thrive. So, you know, creating space is a lesson I have to continue to learn and relearn. So my intention is to use this time together, you know, to create this space. A little bit about me. I'm an anthropologist by background. So I really do believe what Peter Drucker says, that culture does eat strategy for breakfast. I mean, I believe that the only truly sustainable source of competitive advantage comes from building a culture of innovation. And the next great new technology out of Silicon Valley, yes, fine, but let's be honest, how much of that really does impact many of us in our business lives? And can we put into big use in helping grow our businesses? Many respects, there's a lot of hype there which really doesn't actually have a huge amount of relevance for us and how we can grow our business. And I've been fortunate enough to work for some great companies over the years. For instance, the Hay Group, where I was back in 95, invited to launch the first online business in the industry effectively. And despite, you know, the enormous amount of mistakes that I made, nonetheless, the team and the management were able to build this business out into a $150 million business. And when the company was sold to Korn Ferry for almost $500 million, you know, a significant proportion of the value of that transaction was embedded in the information business that really did begin back in 1995. More recently at Syngenta, I led a $2 billion business unit with some, you know, I was very fortunate to have a great team around me who came up with and executed some wonderful innovations, many of which are still in the market now and actually growing significantly. So much of my talk is going to talk, much of the next few minutes will draw on some of these experiences, but I also want to, you know, my experience has been supplemented by role as chairman of a BC, of a software a genomic software company called BC Platforms based here in Switzerland, which is very, very active in the whole ecosystem of gene sequencing, next generation healthcare and human longevity. And then most recently founding the innovation ecosystem, and I really founded this for three reasons. I mean, firstly, to help build my network out after 12 years in a large organization. You know, the larger your organization, the smaller your world. And so for me, it was really important to sort of branch out from, as I left Syngenta, and build out my network. And secondly, really to stay fresh and to supplement my experience with a far broader body of practical experience from a whole range of guests some of whom you might have listened to on the show. And finally, to give something back, to make available the resources that I wish I had access to, as well as those that I use, but I really didn't have access to, but have had a big difference, in how I actually, was able with my team to generate the results. So, you know, over the last few months, we've conducted over 40 in-depth interviews, with CEOs, with heads of innovation in world-class companies, you know, plus with many well-known experts in their fields, you know, talking about change, talking about leadership, talking about innovation. Selection you can see on the website www.innovationecosystem.com, but we've had polar explorers. Here's Rob Swan, a picture of him, who developed a 50-year mission. So a man with extremely strong sense of purpose and mission, and with a very strong message around leadership and around diversity and the importance of that, particularly in life-threatening environments where he spends a lot of his time either leading expeditions with other explorers or with executives and business leaders to teach them his lessons, if you like. Larry Cunningham, the official biographer of one of the strongest and most innovative and sustainable companies on the planet, Berkshire Hathaway, who talked at length about the link between performance and autonomy, which is very, very important in innovation. David Allen, author of Getting Things Done, you know, whose work is really crucial to how, you know, to help, well, his tools are crucial for helping you create the space for innovation. And more recently, Michael Gervais, who is a high performance coach for executives and sports stars in the US and, you know, Olympic athletes. And more recently here in Europe, he also worked with Felix Baumgartner of the Red Bull Stratos fame. And another final person, last but by no means least, Alex Osterwalder, the inventor of a key tool that many innovators use, a business model canvas. So the show has received lots of attention on media platforms such as Inc. magazine, which talked about us being one of the top podcasts for leaders in innovation. Psychology Today. I've been invited to speak at a number of events like Lean Startup, at London Business School, and at the Entrepreneurship Conference. And I wonder why we had all this attention, because none of this has all sort of come towards us. And I think it's really because this is an enduring topic for leaders. Innovation is increasingly challenging. I mean, the word's been bandied around for many, many years, but what's different now is that the traditional sources of innovation are no longer working in many established companies, and they're looking for alternative ways of tapping into the ecosystem for innovation. Here's a recent article, a series of articles in Harvard Business Review, which confronts that very issue head on. So in terms of how I think about innovation, I've got some core principles, if you like, that have evolved over time. But really what I'm looking for, firstly, is what I call foundational knowledge. You know, the lead domino, I think Tim Ferriss talks about it. So what are there a couple of things that you can do? And if you get them right, then everything else, you know, flows from that. So, you know, if you get X right, then Y and Z and A and B and C follow. And one example here, I think, is getting things done methodology, which I discovered in 2002, brought it into Syngenta in 2010. My boss referred to it as providing the greatest return on investment of any training program he'd ever seen. And, you know, I was lucky enough to interview David Allen on the show earlier. Earlier this year, I mean, his dog, you might well have, if you've listened to the show, you'll have heard his dog snoring in the background, which was a little bit unfortunate, but didn't detract from the message, the power of the message, the strength of the message. And, you know, I remain constantly amazed at how frequently his work appears or referred to by my guests. So lead domino, functional knowledge. Secondly, learning from other people's experience and other people's mistakes. Learning can be painful, and I'd rather learn from others. Thirdly, I don't have an MBA. I prefer to learn in the trenches. And I have a strong belief that mindset and psychology does 80% of the lifting, and strategy and tactics the remaining 20%. So I'm always looking finally for tools that help develop new habits and practices and that are proven to work. I believe that success does leave clues, and often, there is a tool there hidden in the case study as you unpack that success that has created the practice. And understanding those tools and figuring out how to use them is, in many respects, is often the best way to create a new habit, or indeed to unlearn an old habit to start to accelerate your journey towards results. So I suspect that, many of you listening or reading relate to this approach. Having signed up to listen to the show or reading this article, you're clearly interested in acquiring foundational knowledge and to learn from me and my guests, both the good and the bad, if you like, and I suspect you're interested in the topic of mindset and tools. So hopefully this is all relevant stuff for you. Now, there are basically four levels of innovation when I think about the whole space that we're commenting on and working in. And my preference is that it starts right in the middle at the individual, with me and you. And from there we build out from the self into you as a team leader, you as someone responsible for marshalling resources to get something happen, to make something happen. Now, a key question here is, whether you take up space as many leaders do, or whether you actually create space. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Then beyond the leader of a team into the leader of an organization. How can you shape the culture, which is a central element of the long-term sustainable innovation engine of a company? Go back to the reference I made earlier on about Larry Cunningham, his work in Berkshire Hathaway. The culture created by Warren Buffett, the founder of Berkshire Hathaway, goes a long, long way to explain the success of that company. So how your role in shaping that organizational culture is fundamental for the long-term viability of your organization. And then finally, the next frontier, if you like, beyond matrix management into ecosystem management. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But those are the four levels, if you like, the four ways that we look at innovation, or I look at innovation. So let's start with the individual as the unit of analysis. And a great place to begin, I think, is looking at the work of Whitney Johnson. And Whitney worked alongside Clayton Christensen, who was in many respects the founder, the pioneer of innovation thinking, management thinking, if you like. And she worked alongside him, investing in his fund in disruptive companies before writing a book called Disrupt Yourself. And many of us, are working in companies that are at risk of disruption. Companies, facing new entrants, facing changes in the regulatory environment, facing evolving customer tastes. And also perhaps, many of us are in jobs that are at risk of disruption as well, be it through, changes in the workforce, millennials, artificial intelligence, automation, well-educated, emerging leaders from places like China and India. And in a world where hopefully we're going to live longer, but without the traditional 6 to 8% growth rate in our portfolio of 401k, pensions, or stocks and shares, it's really important to figure out how to future-proof ourselves as well as our businesses and have a strategy for dealing with this disruption. So this is basically the value of the tool that Whitney Johnson introduces, the S-curve of disruption. And this is a tool that many of you might be familiar with through, as a way of thinking about how the disruptive ideas and products spread through cultures. And she applies this to you as an individual leading innovation in your workplace, as well as innovating with your career. And it's key here to understand where exactly you are on this curve to take full advantage of the exponential forces that characterize, that operate on the S-curve, which could be exponential learning opportunities as well as exponential market adoption opportunities. So well worth understanding this S-curve and what does it mean, where are you on it, and what does it mean for you as you think about innovating yourself and innovating your business. And so I think this is a fundamental piece of foundational knowledge, Another one is questioning. How do you create the space to ask the right questions? And I think asking the right questions at the right time is fundamental. In Syngenta, we used to call this breakthrough questions. And these are questions that combine a huge ambition with an embedded constraint. An example is, how do you double the size of your business with no additional product development? IKEA is really good at this, and they built their whole business and their whole organization basically on asking breakthrough questions. The founder and CEO, Ingvar Kamprad, he founded the business by asking the breakthrough question, how can he take all of the offcuts from sawmills in his country of origin and convert them into low-cost furniture? And 50 years later, he can still be found in China negotiating to take away the feathers from chicken farmers and use them as a low-cost source of stuffing for his soft furnishings. So the concept of a breakthrough question of this, a hugely ambitious goal with an embedded constraint is one that is very, very valuable for all of us as we're thinking about disruption, as we're thinking about innovation. And by the way, Apple do this really well too. And these are strategies that are really initiated by a strong breakthrough question. A really good example from one of my guests, Adam Grant, his breakthrough question was him and his business partner, the co-author of the book, A Beautiful Constraint, were faced with the question, how do they sell 5,000 books in their book launch without a single dollar of marketing budget? And for those of you who've ever written a book, you'll know that selling 5,000 books is a huge ask anyway. But with zero marketing budget, actually it was in a 2-week period as well. Very, very challenging, a very, very strong breakthrough question that culminated in them launching it over 14 cities in the US, across 14 cities in the US, with working with partners in their ecosystem that enabled them to achieve their target. So the point here is it's not a question of resources, it's a question of resourcefulness. And this is a really very important distinction to make as you think about, I've very rarely met a corporate innovator who's got sufficient resources. We're always struggling with lack of resources. So to be able to turn that constraint into a source of energy, a source of resource, if you like, that enables us to accelerate our agenda is a really important foundational skill, and one that is something that would make an enormous difference were you able to master that. So let's move to the team piece. Now, a really important question, which I just asked earlier on, is, do you as a leader take up space or do you create space? And this is not an easy question to answer if we're honest as leaders. In my first senior leadership role, I felt I really needed to have all the answers and to provide really clear direction to my team to help them focus on short-term performance and to develop and drive tight, ambitious meeting agendas. In short, I took up space. And my belief is that the number one job of a leader is to create the space for your team. And this was a huge learning for me. In many companies, we have matrix management. I call this Noah's Ark management, where you might actually have lots of different people doing the same thing, or at least two people doing exactly the same thing. And this is hugely challenging to manage. And so I think the number one job, as I said, is to create this space. And, it is possible by leveraging some tools that a previous guest, Lisa Bedell, is now launching as part of her new book, which comes out very soon, which is called Why Simple Wins. With these tools, it enables you to create some more space for organizations, for individuals to do good work. And this isn't just to be clear, this isn't so that people can go home early, but this is far more around helping people have the right conversations with customers, for example. We developed the concept of curiosity conversations, and we trained our frontline staff to do this. And, this was in Syngenta, and the results were phenomenal. Here's one of the programs that we developed turned into a $100 million business opportunity, and it was written up by Goldman Sachs as a great example of how to innovate in a mature, commoditized marketplace. And this really came through developing capabilities in our sales staff to have what we call curiosity conversations, where you are opening up the space to explore new opportunities with customers. And this sounds hugely sensible and straightforward and obvious, but you'd be amazed about the challenges that we have to get frontline staff to think differently. These are people who've been trained to and have been very, very successful in one way of doing business, one way of interacting with their customers, and getting them to shift and to pause and to ask questions without jumping to the answer or without trying to sell them something is really hard work. And it's subtle and it's difficult, but it's important. And if you get it right, the results are or can be extraordinarily powerful. Now, at the organizational level, one of the ways into this conversation is to think about failure. This is one of the biggest challenges that organizations have. I mean, most organizations are okay with failure so long as it's not them that's failing, but it's the competitors. Or most executives are happy with failure so long as it's not them that's actually doing the failing. And rarely do you fail your way to the top of an organization. So it's really important to confront this in advance. And some companies do this really well. Tata, the Indian conglomerate, created what's called an award called the Dare to Try Award, which sends a great signal to the organization that it's okay to fail. I say to my children when they're skiing, and I also say to employees in a startup I'm on the board of, if you don't want to quit at least, very regularly, then you're not trying hard enough. If you're not falling over on the piece, you're not trying hard enough. And it's the same with innovation. But only a very few companies will go as far as Tata. What we often did in Syngenta was we would do a pre-mortem to identify what could go wrong. And this is one way to uncover the potential sources of failure and head them off at the pass before you get into it. This specific project that I looked after was a post-patent strategy for a $900 million product that I managed. And we had a really good idea of what bad looked like. There was a competitor product that destroyed enormous value 3 years after the patent fell. I mean, it literally fell off a cliff. That's why they call it a patent cliff. So by confronting what failure looked like, we were able to develop a strategy that created enormous value and avoided that failed outcome. And it created enormous value. We were able to grow the business significantly without having to and maintaining price. And this constituted a significant launch platform for next generation technology. So it all begins with the pre-mortem, which is a nice way of, confronting failure without having to go to the extreme, which many companies will be uncomfortable with, of the Tata Dare to Try Award. So finally, let's talk about the ecosystem. And this is, I believe, the next frontier for 21st century managers. How to access the relationships and the capabilities and the customers from the players in your ecosystem. And it's increasingly unlikely that a business has access to everything it needs to innovate within its own four walls. And the winners are going to be those that can actually expand and connect with and leverage their ecosystem. And the potential in terms of time and money and resources you can tap into is exponential in nature as the world becomes more and more virtual, connected, and digitized. And a nice example comes from the Brazilian-based new coffee business that I was responsible for in Syngenta. We started by understanding not just the needs of our customers, the growers, but also their customers, the roasters, and ultimately their customers, the consumer. And in addition, we worked with others in the ecosystem, like banks and credit providers, as well as the certification agencies, like the Rainforest Alliance, like Fairtrade, to ensure that they supported the program at the grower level. And this led to the Financial Times quote or article about the product and about the business, where they referred to Syngenta as the Apple of agribusiness. And I'm not saying that just to impress you, although it does impress me, but to impress on you how important it is to really connect with the ecosystem in order to deliver some of these step change results in innovation. So if we come back to the model, the 4-tier model, what I've done is given a helicopter trip across some of the approaches and the tools and the foundational knowledge, if you like, that make a real difference in the 4 domains of innovation. And this is just a glimpse of the resources and the insights and the tools that we are developing at the innovation ecosystem to help you and your organizations become more innovative and entrepreneurial. And this is, of course, not the only way to do this. There are lots of different ways of skinning the cat, lots of different approaches to innovation. But what I wanted to do here is distill down our experience, or my experience after over 20 years, and also the experience of many of our guests, to make it available to you in an absorbable way over the course of the last 20 minutes. And what I wanted to do now is just touch on a new program that we are launching, which might be of interest to some of you. It won't be of interest to all of you, but it might be of interest to some of you. And this is based on the hope that, some of you might have caught a glimpse of something that fits with your vision, or maybe you heard an example that echoes your own situation. Or it could be that you feel that you now have your hands on a tool that you can use straight away to make a difference and to move things forward. So I'd just like to end with introducing to you the Innovation Leadership Circle, which is a program that we have designed for individuals who are curious and bold and who want to innovate and experiment with how they innovate. And it is designed to help accelerate the delivery of your innovation agenda over a 100-day period. So relevant for directors, VPs, business unit and functional heads who have innovation at the heart of their 2017 business functional agenda, and people who recognize that they need access to additional resources, they want to learn from others in a time and a cost-effective manner, and who place value on building capabilities, networks, and making a difference to their teams, their organizations, and their ecosystems. So if any of that is of interest to you, please drop me a note at mark@innovationecosystem.com, or go onto our site, innovationecosystem.com, and you can find details of the program there. As I say, it's not for everyone at all, but I do believe this will make a huge difference to what you're doing. This is the program that I wish I had access to while I was at Syngenta. It's based on elements of what we did, but we've significantly enhanced it, and we are now making it available to a small number of individuals for whom they feel this would be particularly relevant, given their agenda, given their ambition, given their appetite. So very much look forward to hearing back from you. mark@innovationecosystem.com for more information. And until then, have a great week.